Nari Kim stood at the viewing window of the transport ship, watching the massive space station grow larger in the darkness. Kepler 7 Academy looked like a giant metal flower floating among the stars. Its silver petals caught the light from nearby suns, making it shine like a jewel. She pressed her small hand against the cold glass and took a deep breath. "First time seeing it?" asked Ji-ho Park, the boy standing next to her. He was also from Earth, also 17, and also scared out of his mind. But unlike Nari, he could not hide it well. "Yes," Nari said quietly. Her voice was soft, like always. She never spoke loudly unless she had to. Ji-ho laughed nervously. "I still can't believe we're really here. 2 kids from Earth, going to the most famous school in the galaxy. My mom cried for 3 days when I got accepted." Nari nodded, but did not say anything else. She was thinking about her own family back on Earth. Her grandmother had not cried. Instead, the old woman had given Nari a small wooden box filled with old photos and said, "Remember where you come from, child? Remember what we taught you." The transport ship docked with a soft bump that barely shook the floor. Other students began gathering their bags and talking excitedly. Nari counted at least 6 different alien species just in their small group. There were tall, blue-skinned centaurians with 4 arms, small, furry pictol that looked like walking teddy bears but were supposed to be very smart, 2 students that looked like walking trees, their bark-like skin rough and brown. "Attention, students," came a voice over the ship's speakers. "Welcome to Kepler 7 Academy. Please gather your belongings and proceed to the main airlock. Your orientation will begin in 30 minutes. Ji-ho grabbed his 2 large bags and looked at Nari's single small backpack. "That's all you brought?" "I don't need much," she said. They walked through the airlock into the station. The first thing that hit Nari was how clean everything looked. The walls were white and smooth, glowing softly with their own light. The air smelled like flowers and something else she could not name. Everything was bigger than on Earth ships. The hallways were wide enough for 10 people to walk side by side. "Earth students, this way, please," called a tall centaurian with green skin and 4 graceful arms. She wore the dark blue uniform that meant she was a teacher. "I am Professor Veltar. I will be your species liaison during your time here." Professor Veltar led them through hallways filled with students. Nari tried not to stare, but it was hard. She saw beings that looked like giant insects walking on 2 legs, others that seemed to be made of light and air, floating just above the ground. One group of students had scales like lizards, but walked upright like humans. "The Academy has students from 47 different worlds," Professor Veltar explained as they walked. "Most come from what we call garden worlds, planets where life is easy and safe. Earth is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, which makes you both very rare and very interesting to the other students." "What does that mean exactly?" Ji-ho asked. "It means your planet tries to kill everything that lives on it," said a deep, rough voice behind them. Nari turned around and saw the largest student she had ever seen. He stood nearly 3 meters tall and looked like a cross between a crocodile and a man. His skin was dark green with black spots and his teeth were like daggers. When he smiled, it was not friendly. "This is Crix," Professor Veltar said. Her voice sounded tired. "He is a Saurian from the Dracon system." "Deathworlders," Crix said, looking down at Nari and Ji-ho like they were insects. "I heard Earth humans were supposed to be dangerous. You 2 look like children playing dress-up." Nari looked up at him calmly. She did not say anything, but she noticed everything. How his muscles moved under his thick skin, where his joints bent. How he stood with too much weight on his left foot. Her grandmother had taught her to always watch and learn. "Crix, please return to your group," Professor Veltar said firmly. Crix laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Of course, Professor. I just wanted to meet our new classmates." He looked at Nari again. "I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other, little human." He walked away, his heavy feet making the floor vibrate with each step. "Don't mind him. Professor Veltar said quickly. Saurians are naturally competitive. It's just their way. Jiho was pale and sweating. He's huge. Did you see those teeth? Nari had seen the teeth. She had also seen how Crix moved, how he breathed, how his eyes tracked their movements. She had seen a predator sizing up what he thought was prey. He's just big, she said quietly. They reached their dormitory section. The rooms were small but comfortable, with 2 beds, 2 desks, and a large window showing the stars outside. Nari and Jiho would be sharing the space for the next year. Classes begin tomorrow, Professor Veltar said. Get some rest. And remember, you are representing your entire species here. Make Earth proud. After she left, Jiho sat heavily on his bed. A whole year, he said. A whole year with things like Crix wanting to prove how tough they are. Nari unpacked her small bag carefully. She put her clothes in the dresser, her books on the desk, and her grandmother's wooden box under her pillow. Inside the box were photos of her family, but also other things. Small metal objects that looked like jewelry but were not. Her grandmother had been very specific about when and how to use them. Nari, Jiho said, what if we can't handle this? What if we're not strong enough? Nari sat on her bed and looked out at the stars. Earth was somewhere out there, tiny and far away, but she could still feel it like a weight in her chest. All those years of training, all those lessons about patience and watching and waiting for the right moment. We'll be fine, she said. But as she said it, she was thinking about Crix's smile, about the way he looked at them like they were toys he wanted to break. Her grandmother had always said that the most dangerous moment was when your enemy thought you were helpless. Nari closed her eyes and began the breathing exercises her family had taught her since she was small. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new enemies who thought they knew what humans were capable of. They were all going to learn something new. 3 weeks had passed since Nari arrived at Kepler 7 Academy, and she was beginning to understand how the social system worked. It was simple, really. The bigger and stronger you looked, the more respect you got. The smaller and quieter you were, the more others thought they could push you around. Crix had made this very clear. It started small. Nari would be walking to class, and Crix would suddenly appear in the hallway, blocking her path. He would stand there, smiling his terrible smile, forcing her to walk around him. He never touched her, never said anything threatening. But his message was clear. I can stop you anytime I want. Just ignore him, Jiho said for the 10th time, as they sat in their room after another long day. Professor Veltar said saurians are just naturally competitive. Nari was sitting cross-legged on her bed, perfectly still. To Jiho, it looked like she was meditating. He did not know that she was actually practicing the mental exercises her grandmother had taught her. How to map an opponent's weak points. How to calculate the exact amount of force needed to disable someone 3 times your size. He's getting worse, Jiho continued. Today in Galactic History class, he kept making those comments about primitive Deathworlders and looking right at us. Even Professor Nixtal noticed. Nari opened her eyes. What did Professor Nixtal do? Nothing. Just asked him to focus on the lesson. But everyone was laughing. That was the problem, Nari thought. The other students had started to think Crix was funny. What began as one bully picking on 2 humans had turned into entertainment for half the school. The next morning brought comparative planetary ecosystems class, Nari's favorite subject. She had spent 2 weeks working on a detailed project about how different gravity levels affected plant growth. The research was careful and thorough, and she was proud of the work. She walked into the classroom early, as always, and placed her data pad on her desk. The room slowly filled with other students. Crix came in last, his heavy footsteps making the floor shake slightly. Good morning, students, said Professor Dalvin, a kind centaurian with silver skin. Today we will be presenting your ecosystem projects. Let's begin with the Earth students. Nari, would you please come forward? Nari picked up her datapad and walked to the front of the class. But when she looked at the screen, her heart sank. The pad was blank. All her work was gone. I'm sorry, Professor, she said quietly. There seems to be a problem with my datapad. Technical difficulties happen, Professor Dalvin said kindly. Can you present from memory? Nari began to explain her research without the visual aids. She spoke clearly about gravity differences and soil composition and growth patterns. But halfway through, Crix raised one of his massive hands. Professor, he said in his grinding voice, I think there's a problem with the humans' research. What kind of problem, Crix? Well, she's claiming that high-gravity worlds produce stronger plant structures. But everyone knows that Deathworld species just adapt through random luck, not actual evolutionary strength. Her whole premise is wrong. Several students laughed. Nari felt her face getting warm, but she kept her voice steady. The research shows clear correlations between gravity levels and plant density, she said. Maybe on primitive worlds? Crix said, still smiling. But real science requires real understanding, not just guessing. More laughter. Even some of the students who had been friendly to Nari were smiling now. Professor Dalvin looked uncomfortable, but did not correct Crix. Thank you, Nari, the professor said quickly. Crix, you're next. Nari returned to her seat. Her hands were steady, but inside she was calculating. Crix had erased her work. He had planned this humiliation carefully. And now he was standing at the front of the class, talking about how superior Saurian science was compared to primitive Deathworld theories. After class, Nari stayed behind to speak with Professor Dalvin. Professor, my datapad was fine this morning. All my research was there. The Centaurian's 4 arms moved nervously. These things happen, Nari. Technology can be unreliable. Perhaps you should back up your work in the future. Nari understood. Professor Dalvin knew what had happened, but he was not going to do anything about it. The Academy had rules about student conflicts, and those rules said teachers should not interfere unless there was actual violence. That afternoon brought combat simulation class, taught by Commander Torak, a massive being that looked like a walking boulder. The simulations were supposed to help students understand military tactics and self-defense. Today we will practice close-quarters combat scenarios, Commander Torak announced. I need volunteers for a demonstration. Crix's hand shot up immediately. I volunteer, Commander. Excellent! I need an opponent for you. The commander's rocky face turned toward the class. How about one of our Deathworld students? Nari, step forward. Nari felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Jiho looked terrified. Crix looked delighted. Commander, said Thias, an insectoid student with kind eyes. Perhaps someone closer to Crix's size would be more appropriate. Nonsense. Crix said loudly. The little human keeps claiming to be from a dangerous world. Let's see what Deathworld training looks like. Nari walked to the center of the practice area. Crix followed, his massive form casting a shadow over her. The simulation suits they wore would prevent actual injury, but they would still feel pain. From impacts. This is a basic self-defense scenario, Commander Torak explained. Crix will attempt to subdue Nari using non-lethal force. Nari will attempt to escape or disable her opponent. Begin when ready. Crix did not wait. He lunged forward immediately, trying to grab Nari with his massive arms. But she was not there anymore. She had slipped aside at the last second, moving like water. Crix spun around, confused. Stop running and fight! Nari stood perfectly still, in the center of the practice area. She was not breathing hard. She looked calm, almost bored. Crix charged again. This time, Nari moved just enough to avoid his grasp, then tapped him lightly on the back as he stumbled past. The simulation suit registered it as a point for her. Lucky hit, Crix growled. But it was not luck, and Nari knew it. She was reading. His movements like words on a page. Every step he took, every shift of his weight, told her exactly where he would be next. Her grandmother had taught her this dance when she was 6 years old. Crix became more aggressive, swinging his massive fists in wide arcs. Nari moved between his attacks like smoke, occasionally scoring light touches that the simulation counted as points. She never hit him hard, never tried to hurt him. She just stayed out of reach and made him look clumsy. "Enough," Commander Torak called. "Interesting technique, Nari. Very evasive." But as Nari walked back to her place, she heard Crix mutter something that made her blood run cold. "Clever little mouse," he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. But even mice get caught eventually, and when they do, they get broken. That night, Nari sat in her room while Jiho studied at his desk. She was thinking about her grandmother's lessons, about patience and timing and the difference between winning a fight and ending one. "Nari," Jiho said suddenly, "you could have hurt him today, couldn't you? In the simulation, I mean. You moved like you knew exactly what he was going to do." Nari looked out their window at the stars. "Maybe. Then why didn't you? Why do you just let him push us around?" Nari was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Because it's not time yet." Jiho wanted to ask what she meant, but something in her voice stopped him. Instead, he went back to his studying, and Nari went back to watching the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, with its storms and earthquakes and predators. A world that had taught her people that the best hunters were the ones who waited for exactly the right moment to strike. Crix thought he was teaching her about fear, but really, he was teaching her about him. Every day, she learned more about how he moved, how he thought, what made him angry, and every day she got a little more patient. The Academy's main dining hall was always busy during the midday meal period. Students from dozens of different worlds gathered at long tables, sharing food and stories from their home planets. The hall was enormous, with a curved ceiling that showed a projection of whatever sky the Academy was currently facing. Today it showed a field of golden stars. Nari sat alone at a small table near the back wall, as she had done every day for the past month. Her meal was simple: rice, vegetables, and protein bars that tasted almost like the food from home. She ate slowly and quietly, watching the other students without appearing to stare. Jiho had tried to eat with her for the first few weeks, but she had told him to sit with other students. "Make friends," she had said. "Don't let them think we're afraid to separate." It was good advice. Jiho now sat with a group of younger students from various worlds. They seemed to like his stories about Earth, and he was learning to laugh again. Nari was glad for that. One of them should be able to enjoy their time here. She was halfway through her meal when she sensed movement behind her. Heavy footsteps, the particular rhythm she had learned to recognize. Crix was approaching, and he was not alone. "Look what we have here!" Crix's voice rumbled over the dining hall's general noise. The little Deathworld mouse, eating all by herself. Nari did not turn around. She continued eating, her movements calm and steady, but she was counting footsteps, listening to breathing patterns. Crix had brought 3 friends with him today. 2 other saurians and something that sounded like it had too many legs. "I'm talking to you, human," Crix said, moving to stand directly behind her chair. The conversations at nearby tables had begun to quiet down. Students were starting to notice what was happening. Nari could feel dozens of eyes turning toward them, and she knew this was exactly what Crix wanted, an audience. "Maybe she's deaf," said one of the other saurians. "I heard Deathworld humans have poor hearing because of all the noise on their planet." "No, she can hear fine," Crix said. "She's just scared. Isn't that right, little mouse?" Nari took another bite of rice. She chewed slowly, swallowed, and reached for her water cup. The motion was so normal, so calm, that it seemed to make Crix angry. "I said I'm talking to you!" Still, Nari did not respond. More tables had gone quiet now. The silence was spreading across the dining hall like ripples on water. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to watch. Crix moved around to stand in front of her table. He placed his massive hands on the surface and leaned down until his face was level with hers. This close, Nari could see every detail of his. Predator features. The way his nostrils flared when he was angry. How his pupils contracted when he focused on something he wanted to destroy. "You know what I think?" he said, loud enough for half the dining hall to hear. "I think humans aren't really from a death world at all. I think your whole species are just pets that the Federation keeps around for entertainment." Some students laughed. Others looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. "Look at you," Crix continued, "sitting there like a scared little animal. No wonder your planet almost destroyed itself. You're too weak to handle real challenges." Nari finished her rice. She set down her fork with a soft click and finally looked up at Crix. Her expression was completely neutral, like she was looking at a mildly interesting insect. This seemed to enrage him more than anything else she had done. "You think you're better than me?" he snarled. "You think because you got lucky in that combat simulation, you're some kind of warrior?" He reached across the table and grabbed her meal tray. Rice, vegetables, and protein bars scattered across the floor as he lifted it over her head. "Let me show you what I think of Deathworld warriors," he said, and dumped the entire contents of the tray onto Nari's head. The dining hall went completely silent. Food dripped from Nari's black hair onto her shoulders. A piece of protein bar slid down her forehead and landed on the table with a wet sound. Nari sat perfectly still. She did not wipe her face. She did not stand up. She did not even blink. Crix laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "There's the real human, covered in garbage, just like your whole species." He leaned down even closer, so close that only Nari could hear his next words. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, but it carried all the promise of violence that had been building for weeks. "Tomorrow night, little mouse, after classes end, I'm going to find you somewhere private, and I'm going to break every bone in your body, slowly. And when I'm done, I'm going to do the same thing to your friend. And there's nothing you can do to stop me." Nari looked up at him. For just a moment, something flickered in her dark eyes. Something that might have been recognition, or calculation, or the first spark of decision. "Is that a promise?" she asked quietly. Crix's smile widened. "Oh yes, little mouse. That's a promise." What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Nari was still sitting in her chair, still looking small and helpless with food dripping from her hair. But her hands moved with impossible speed and precision. Both arms shot upward, her fingers, finding exact points on either side of Crix's thick neck. She did not grab him. She did not pull him down. Instead, she simply placed her hands in 2 very specific positions and twisted. The sound was like a dry branch snapping. Crix's massive body went completely rigid for a heartbeat. Then he toppled backward like a falling tree, his 3-meter frame hitting the dining hall floor with a crash that shook the entire room. Nari calmly picked up a napkin from her table and began wiping food from her face. She moved like nothing had happened. Like the enormous saurian body lying motionless on the floor was just an interesting piece of furniture. The silence in the dining hall was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the air circulation system seemed to have stopped. Finally, one of Crix's friends found his voice. "Crix! Crix! Get up!" But Crix was not getting up. His massive form lay twisted on the floor, his neck bent at an angle that was clearly wrong. His yellow eyes stared at the ceiling, but they were not seeing anything anymore. Nari finished cleaning her face and hair. She folded the napkin neatly and placed it on the table. Then she picked up her fork and began eating the few pieces of food that had remained on her plate. "Someone should call the medical team," she said conversationally, as if she was commenting on the weather. The dining hall erupted. Students began shouting and running. Some rushed toward Crix's body, others ran for the exits. Academy security alarms started blaring. Through it all, Nari continued eating. She sat calmly in her chair, occasionally glancing at the chaos around her with mild interest. When a security officer ran past her table, she helpfully pointed toward where Crix lay. "He's over there," she said politely. Jiho appeared at her side, his face white with shock. "Nari, what did you do?" She looked up at him and smiled. It was the first real smile anyone at the academy had seen from her. "I kept a promise," she said. The medical team arrived and immediately began working on Crix. But Nari could have told them it was useless. She had felt his vertebrae separate under her fingers. She had felt the exact moment when his spinal cord severed completely. Her grandmother had taught her that technique when she was 12 years old. "Only use this if your life truly depends on it," the old woman had said, "because once you use it, there is no going back." Nari understood now what her grandmother had meant. She was no longer the quiet exchange student who had arrived a month ago. She was something else entirely. As the security team swarmed the dining hall and the other students whispered in fear and amazement, Nari finished her meal. Then she stood up, smoothed down her uniform, and waited patiently for whatever would come next. After all, she had learned patience from the best teachers in the galaxy, Earth, and everything that lived there. The Academy's security office was smaller than Nari had expected. She sat in a simple metal chair across from Commander Velnok, the head of station security. Behind him, a large screen showed the dining hall incident from 3 different camera angles. The recording played over and over, each loop showing the same impossible moment, a small human girl killing a massive Saurian without even standing up. "I have watched this footage 17 times, Commander Velnok said. His species looked like walking crystals, and his voice made a chiming sound when he spoke. Each time, I see something that should not be possible." Nari sat with her hands folded in her lap. She had been in this room for 4 hours, answering the same questions again and again. Where did she learn to fight? Why did she not report Crix's harassment? How did she kill someone 3 times her size with what appeared to be no effort? "I told you," she said quietly. "My family taught me martial arts. Crix threatened to hurt me and my friend. I defended myself." "Martial arts," Commander Velnok repeated. The crystals on his head flickered with different colors. "This was not martial arts, Miss Kim. This was surgical precision. You struck 2 pressure points simultaneously with exact force calculations. The medical examiner says Crix's cervical vertebrae were separated with mechanical perfection." Dr. Hesri, the Academy's chief medical officer, stepped forward. She was a tall, thin being with 6 arms and eyes like a mantis. "Commander, the injury pattern is unlike anything in our database. It required intimate knowledge of Saurian anatomy and the exact amount of pressure needed to sever the spinal column without damaging surrounding tissue." "Are you saying she planned this?" asked Professor Veltar, who had been sitting quietly in the corner. "I'm saying she knew exactly what she was doing," Dr. Hesri replied. "This was not a lucky accident or a moment of panic. This was the work of someone trained to kill efficiently." Nari listened to them discuss her like she was not in the room. She was thinking about her grandmother's house back on Earth, with its wooden floors and paper walls. The old woman had trained Nari in the basement, on mats that smelled like incense and years of sweat. "Every species has weak points," her grandmother had said during one lesson. "Learn them all. Study them until you can find them in your sleep. But remember, child, this knowledge is not for showing off. It is only for when all other choices are gone." "Miss Kim," Commander Velnok said, drawing her attention back to the present. "We have spoken with your friend, Jiho Park. He tells us you asked him about Saurian anatomy several weeks ago. Is this true?" "Yes," Nari said. "Why?" "I wanted to understand their physiology. Know your environment, my grandmother always said. That includes the people in it." Professor Veltar leaned forward. Nari, Jiho also told us that you spent time each evening in what he thought was meditation. Can you describe these activities? Nari was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My grandmother taught me forms, exercises to keep the mind and body sharp. Part of it looks like meditation, but it's really preparation. Preparation for what? For whatever might happen. Commander Velnox. Crystals turned a deep red color. Miss Kim, are you telling us that you have been planning to kill Crix since you arrived at this academy? No, Nari said firmly. I never planned to kill anyone, but I prepared for the possibility that someone might try to kill me. Dr. Hessery made a note on her datapad. The medical records show that Crix visited the health center twice in the past month, both times for minor injuries, bruised knuckles, scraped scales. When asked, he said he had been training extra hard. We now believe he was practicing attacks specifically designed to hurt humans. This was news to Nari, but it did not surprise her. Crix had been planning something big for weeks. She had seen it in the way he watched her, the way he tested her reactions. There's something else, Professor Veltar said reluctantly. We've received testimony from other students about the harassment campaign. It was much more extensive than we realized. Commander, Velnox activated another screen. Student Theiss reports that Crix destroyed your research project 3 weeks ago. Student Voron says Crix deliberately damaged your personal belongings on multiple occasions, and yesterday Student Misko witnessed Crix threatening you directly, in the hallway between classes. Why did no one report this? Dr. Hessery asked. Professor Veltar looked uncomfortable. According to the students we interviewed, they believed the harassment was just normal social dynamics between species, from different worlds. Many said they thought humans were supposed to be dangerous, so they assumed Nari could handle herself. They were right, Nari said quietly. But you never fought back, Commander Velnox observed. For weeks, you endured escalating harassment without any visible reaction. Then in one moment, you killed your tormentor with perfect efficiency. Why? Nari thought about this question. It was harder to answer than the others because it required explaining something that most non-humans would never understand. On Earth, she said slowly, we have many predators. Big cats, bears, venomous snakes. The dangerous ones don't roar and make noise before they attack. They watch and they wait. And when the moment is right, they strike once and end the threat, completely. So you consider yourself a predator? I consider myself human, Nari said. Humans survived on a death world not because we were the biggest or strongest, but because we were smart enough to know when not to fight, and precise enough to win when we had to. The room was quiet for several minutes. Finally, Commander Velnox spoke again. Miss Kim, the Galactic Federation has laws about violence between students. However, these laws recognize the right of self-defense, especially in cases of prolonged harassment and direct threats. What does that mean? Nari asked. It means, Professor Veltar said with obvious relief, that you will not be charged with murder. The evidence clearly shows that Crix escalated the situation beyond reasonable limits and made specific threats against your life. Dr. Hessery added, however, there will be consequences. This incident has caused significant trauma among the student body. Many are afraid of you now. Nari nodded. She had expected this. What kind of consequences? Mandatory counseling sessions, Commander Velnox said. Regular check-ins with Academy mental health staff, and you will be required to participate in a series of educational presentations about human capabilities and Deathworld psychology. Educational presentations? Professor Veltar explained. The truth is, Nari, most of the galaxy has completely wrong ideas about humans and other Deathworld species. They think you're either helpless primitives or mindless berserkers. This incident has shown them something different, and frankly, it's scared them. Good, Nari said. Good. Fear can lead to respect if handled properly, and respect can lead to peace. She paused. My grandmother used to say that sometimes you have to break one predator to teach the rest of the pack to leave you alone. Commander Velnok's crystals flickered through several colors before settling on a soft blue. Miss Kim, I must ask you directly, are there other students at this academy who should be concerned about their safety? Nari looked at him steadily. Commander, I have never started a fight in my life. I have never threatened anyone or used violence against someone who was not trying to hurt me. That will not change. But if someone else threatens you the way Crix did, then they should hope they're faster learners than he was. The interview ended 20 minutes later. As Nari was escorted back to her dormitory, she passed groups of students in the hallways. Their reactions were immediate and obvious. Some stared in fascination. Others quickly moved to the other side of the corridor. A few pointed and whispered to their friends. Nari did not mind. She had learned something important today. The galaxy had spent so long thinking of humans as either weak or savage that they had never considered a third option. Humans who were perfectly controlled, precisely deadly, and absolutely patient. It was a lesson that would serve them all well in the future. When she reached her room, Jiho was waiting for her. He looked pale and worried. Are you okay? He asked. I heard they were questioning you for hours. I'm fine, Nari said. She sat on her bed and looked out at the stars. How are the other students treating you? They're different now. Respectful, I guess, but also scared. He paused. Nari, that thing you did to Crix. Could you teach me? Nari smiled. Maybe someday, but first you need to learn patience. How long did it take you to learn? Nari thought about all the years of training, all the lessons from her grandmother about when to act and when to wait, about the difference between fighting and ending a threat. I'm still learning, she said. 2 months had passed since the incident in the dining hall, and Kepler 7 Academy felt like a completely different place. The changes were subtle but unmistakable. Students moved through the hallways with more awareness of their surroundings. Conversations were more polite. The casual bullying that had once been considered normal social behavior had almost entirely disappeared. Nari sat in the same spot she had always chosen in the dining hall, the small table near the back wall. But now, instead of eating alone, she was surrounded by students from a dozen different worlds. They came not as friends, exactly, but as something more complex. Students who wanted to understand what they had witnessed. Is it true that all humans can do what you did? Asked Yelnara, a young Centaurian with curious silver eyes. Nari looked up from her meal. No. Most humans learn different skills. Some are better at building things, or healing people, or growing food. I learned martial arts because my family believed it was important. But could they learn? Pressed Castro, a Pictal whose fur was always perfectly groomed. If they wanted to? Maybe, with enough time and proper teaching. Nari paused, thinking about how to explain something that most aliens would never truly understand. But the real skill isn't in the fighting. It's in knowing when not to fight. This brought confused looks from several students. Voron, an ethereal, who looked like living mist, floated closer to the table. I don't understand. If you can defeat someone like Crix so easily, why would you ever choose not to use that ability? Nari set down her fork and looked around the table. These students had been asking her questions like this for weeks now. At first, she had found it annoying, but Professor Veltar had explained that this was part of her educational requirement, helping other species understand how humans actually thought. Tell me, Nari said to Vorian, what happens on your world when two people disagree about something important? We discuss it. We examine the problem from multiple angles and reach a consensus. And if someone threatens you physically, that doesn't happen. Physical violence is extremely rare on ethereal worlds. Nari nodded. On most garden worlds, violence is rare because life is easy. There's usually enough food, enough space, enough resources for everyone. But on Earth, resources are limited and danger is constant. We learned that fighting should always be the last choice, because fighting means someone might die. But Crix was much larger than you, said Thais, the insectoid student who had tried to help Nari during the combat simulation. Weren't you afraid? Of course I was afraid. Fear keeps you alive, but being afraid doesn't mean you have to act afraid. Ji-ho, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. Nari, can I tell them about your grandmother? Nari considered this, then nodded. Nari's grandmother was a martial arts master on Earth, Ji-ho explained to the group. But she only used her skills twice in her entire life, once to protect her family during a war, and once to protect a stranger who was being attacked. Nari told me that her grandmother always said the greatest victory was the fight you never had to have. Then why learn to fight at all? Asked Castro. Nari smiled. Because sometimes people like Crix exist, people who mistake kindness for weakness and patience for fear. When you meet someone like that, you have two choices: become a victim or end the threat completely. Professor Veltar appeared at the edge of their group. The tall Centaurian had been observing these informal discussions for weeks, and Nari could tell he was pleased with how they were going. Miss Kim, he said, the Academy Council would like to speak with you when you have time. Is there a problem? Quite the opposite. They want to discuss the long-term implications of your educational presentations. An hour later, Nari found herself in the Academy's main conference room, facing a panel of administrators from various species. The room was impressive, with a curved ceiling that showed real-time views of space and furniture designed to accommodate beings of many different sizes and body types. Miss Kim, said Chancellor Korvek, a massive crystalline being who led the Academy. In the 2 months since the incident with Crix, we have seen remarkable changes in student behavior. Harassment complaints have dropped by 94%. Academic performance has improved across all species. Students report feeling safer and more focused on their studies. Nari waited for him to continue. We believe this is directly related to your presence and the demonstration you provided. However, we need to understand the broader implications. Are other human students likely to possess similar capabilities? Some will, Nari said honestly. Humans come from a dangerous world, so many of us learn some form of self-defense. But most are more interested in building things, or exploring, or creating art. We're not all warriors. But you could become warriors if necessary, asked Vice-Chancellor Meltari, a tall, thin being with 6 arms. If necessary, yes. Humans are very good at adapting to threats. Chancellor Korvek leaned forward. Miss Kim, the Galactic Federation has been reconsidering its classification system for Deathworld species. Your incident has highlighted how little we truly understand about worlds like Earth. What does that mean? It means, said Professor Veltar, that humans may have been significantly underestimated. The Federation is beginning to realize that Deathworld species aren't just lucky survivors. You may be some of the most capable beings in the galaxy. Nari thought about this. That could be dangerous. Dangerous how? If people are afraid of humans, they might decide to attack Earth before we become too strong. Fear can lead to respect, but it can also lead to preventive warfare. The silence that followed this statement was profound. Finally, Chancellor Korvek spoke. You believe other species might consider humans a threat? I think, Nari said carefully, that humans need to be very careful about how we present ourselves to the galaxy. Strong enough to defend ourselves, but not so strong that others feel threatened. Patient enough to avoid unnecessary conflicts, but decisive enough to end unavoidable ones. Is that what you were doing with Crix? Managing perception? Nari considered the question. Partly. but mostly I was just trying to survive long enough to graduate. This brought unexpected laughter from several council members. Miss Kim, Chancellor Korvek said, we would like to offer you a position here at the Academy after you complete your studies. We believe having human perspectives in our educational programs would be invaluable. What kind of position? Cultural. Liaison. Help us understand Deathworld psychology. Teach other students about human capabilities and limitations. Prevent misunderstandings that could lead to more incidents like the one with Crix. Neri thought about her grandmother's house, on Earth, with its peaceful garden and quiet rooms. Then she thought about the galaxy beyond, full of species who didn't understand each other and conflicts that could be avoided with better communication. I'll consider it, she said. Later that evening, Nari sat in her dormitory room, writing a letter to her grandmother. Outside their window, the stars wheeled slowly past as the Academy continued its orbit. Dear grandmother, she wrote, I think I understand now why you wanted me to come here. It wasn't just to learn about other species. It was to teach them about us, to show them that humans are not the primitives or savages they imagined, but something more complex and potentially more dangerous. I killed someone today. Well, 2 months ago, but I'm still processing what it means. You always taught me that violence should be the last resort, but that when it becomes necessary, it should be swift and final. I think I did the right thing, but I also think the consequences will ripple out farther than either of us expected. The other students look at me differently now, not with hatred or disgust, but with a kind of respectful wariness. They're beginning to understand that quiet doesn't mean weak, and patience doesn't mean passive. Some of them are even starting to learn these lessons themselves. I think this is how humans will find their place in the galaxy, not as conquerors or victims, but as teachers. We can show other species what it means to survive on a world that constantly tries to kill you. We can demonstrate the value of patience, preparation, and precise action. But most importantly, we can prove that being dangerous and being peaceful are not opposites. The strongest hunters are often the most gentle because they have nothing to prove to anyone. I miss you, grandmother. I miss our quiet mornings in the garden and our evening practice sessions. But I think I'm finally beginning to understand the lessons you've been teaching me my whole life. The galaxy is a big place, full of predators, and prey and everything in between. But maybe, with patience and wisdom, we can help everyone learn to coexist. After all, the best victory is still the fight you never have to have. Love, Nari. She sealed the letter and prepared it for the next transport to Earth. Then she sat by the window, looking out at the stars and thinking about the future. Somewhere, out there, other human students were probably having their own adventures, learning their own lessons about strength and patience and the delicate balance between peace and survival. Nari smiled. The galaxy was about to learn a lot more about Deathworld humans. She hoped they were ready,